5, 4, 3, 2.
Here? Hello, we're back. This is the end of the debate, and now let's take a look at what the crowd thinks. We put in every platform a way to both monitor what you feel, how they made you feel, and asked you what you thought. Who won each round? So Rappler had a poll on its site, and with us now is Katerina Francisco. Katerina is one of our reporters. She's been monitoring your votes. Tell us what happened for each of the rounds.
For each of the rounds, we see that there's been...
Sorry, let me give you a mic.
For each of the rounds, we see that there's been a consistent trend. It's always been Duterte at #1 and Binay at the last place. And he almost always has single-digit figures for that. For second and third place, it's between Rojas and Poe. Rojas took the first 2 rounds. Rojas was third place in the first round of the first segment of the debate, while Poe was the second place. But then he overtook Poe in the succeeding rounds of the debate. So we see that the consistent trend seems to be that Duterte is #1, Binay is at 4th place, and Rojas and Poe are at 2nd and 3rd place. It also mirrors the performance in the Cagayan de Oro presidential debate. Duterte was also #1, and Binay was also at the consistent last place, even with Santiago in the mix. If we go back to the first debate, we see that the second place in the debate in the Rappler polls went either to Santiago for the first round or Rojas for rounds 2 and 3. So that's been the consistent trend so far. The Davao City Mayor has a lot of online followers voting on the Rappler polls.
Fantastic. Thanks, Katerina. Now let's go to Twitter, Facebook, sentiment analysis. And for that, let's turn to our social media head, and I'll take you to our Stacy De Jesus. Stace.
Hi, Maria. So what we're seeing here is also consistent with what Katerina said, that a lot of Duterte supporters have been very noisy on Facebook. So they've been consistently leading the share of voice for Duterte. This has also been consistent even before the debates, days before that, and the gap is really big. But you can see that the lead is after Duterte, that's followed by Rojas for Facebook. For Twitter, it's been a crazy.
Sorry, before you leave Facebook,
yes,
the gap between Duterte and Rojas from first and second place, how large is that gap?
Super large. I can actually show you the graph if you guys can zoom in here. It's not even actually very.
These are real-time, near real-time results.
Yes,
okay,
these are real-time results. This is the hashtag volume before the debate started, and today you can see that there's been a huge spike for PH Vote Duterte, and if you can. I don't know if you can see it, but it's very far from
exponential.
All the other, yes, exponential spike for Duterte, and the clear next would be Rojas, who is color yellow for this chart. But sorry, I'm trying to. But he's also in the same level with the other, basically the same level with the other candidates. For Twitter, it's been a crazy fight between Binay, I would say, and Duterte. It could possibly be so positive or negative for Binay, though. Before the debate has started, Binay was leading the share of voice on Twitter.
Share of voice means number of people talking about
him, right?
talking
about him. When the debates actually started, Duterte and Binay have been switching places per round. So Duterte overtook the first round, and then Binay again, and so on. So the supporters have been, using the hashtags back and forth, trying to make sure that their candidates are making noise on social media. What's interesting also, while all this is happening, is Miriam Santiago has been trying to answer the questions via social media. So that's it for.
Let's look at sentiment analysis. This is the overall on Twitter and Facebook.
This is overall Twitter and Facebook. it's divided into positive, negative, and neutral. For Mar Rojas, it's mostly 30% negative and then 13.6 positive and then 56% neutral. For Rodi Duterte, for mayor, our Davao City mayor, 24.9% negative and 25% positive, so more or less the same. And then Judge Marbinay is mostly positive. Miriam Santiago mostly positive, even though she's not there. But Grace Poe has a 54.9% positive sentiment on her online, which is really interesting. Yeah, so that's powered by Senti, one of our partners.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, Stacy. I'm going to throw it to our, oh, we're still going. Okay, our editors are working on the reasons why. Let's go to our debate adjudicators. Before we come to you, let me ask our reporters who have actually covered each of these candidates what they thought. Why don't I start? Are you guys ready? Who wants to go first? They're all writing. They're all writing. Let's go with Mayor Duterte. Pia Renada, are you ready?
Okay, I'll try to
Your reactions. How did he do?
I think he was more competitive this time around. The last debate, he played it safe. He didn't really insult anyone. He didn't really ask direct questions. But this time around, he kept saying that Mar is a fraud. He kept saying he's pretentious. He hit on Mar's performance during Yolanda rehabilitation. But at the same time, we also saw him agreeing with a lot of other statements, like when Binay said he didn't have a question for Duterte. Duterte came back and complimented Binay, saying he's qualified to run for president. So it was a strange Duterte. Like he was trying to be strategic, but he was also coming out as a bit too cute, a bit too snide maybe. And I'm not sure how it came across to some people. It seemed like he didn't really take the debate seriously at some points, and then he didn't really articulate very well his platform. Like during the question on his crime platform, his promise of 3 to 6 months, I was surprised he didn't mention his plan to double the salaries of policemen and military, his plan to create special trial courts for heinous crimes to make the litigation faster, the cases faster. So he does have a plan, but for some reason he didn't really elaborate on that. He just kept saying, I have the political will to do it, I will do it, and let's leave it at that. So I think he could have banked more on his plan. He already has a plan, so why not lay it out for everyone to see? So that really confused me. Like, it could have been his moment to shine, but he did not.
Did anything he did surprise you? Was anything out of character?
Not really, because he's unpredictable. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he was predictably unpredictable. So for me, he just keeps surprising people with what he does. But I think this time around, he could be more consistent.
Right.
Now is the time to be consistent, because if you talk about the political will, the leadership, then you have to show it in your actions that you mean what you say and you have the follow-up for everything.
Online support. I mean, you heard from Stacy most of it, the polls and Twitter share of voice. Although Twitter actually went to Binay, but this online support, is that a surprise for Duterte?
No, not
it's
at
not,
all.
right?
Yeah, it's consistent.
It is something that's part of his campaign.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Pia. Anything surprising on climate change?
Well, it really revealed how much the candidates know about climate change. I believe the candidate who had the best answer for the question of the journalist was Mar Rojas, because he was on point saying that we need to make the shift to renewable energy. Because the point of the journalist who asked the question was, how do we balance our commitment to the UN, reducing by 70% our emissions by the year 2030 versus our need to industrialize as a developing country? So Mar hit it on the spot, but then I was surprised Grace Poe tried to answer, but then she mentioned all the measures she mentioned are adaptation, not mitigation. They're more of how to protect citizens from calamities, disasters, but not really how to minimize our emissions. So she had a very long answer, but I think it wasn't direct to the point exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you, Pia. And I think our reporters, Camille, would you like to talk, or you're still going? Okay, why don't I give Camila Lamia has been following Grace Poe, and how did she do?
Well, it's a surprise. Well, it's a surprise that Grace Poe is now answering questions directly, because when you're following her on the campaign trail, it's usually full of generic statements, motherhood statements. But now, it's a pleasant surprise for me because as a reporter following her, it's the first time that we actually see this kind of Grace Poe. But we know for a fact that she's a feisty person like that. But it's the first time that she actually did it in public. I think nothing about the issues. I'm not quite sure if she answered the Coco Levy issue because I reread the transcript and it said there that what will you do to the remaining questionable assets not yet under the government custody. So
Right.
but her answer was about the 70 billion that's already with the government. So people are still wondering what her take is on the issue because what she said there, she already said in previous interviews and in sorties and campaigns. So that's
During the back and forth with the candidates with Mar Rojas, she had our adjudicators actually pointed out she had a very, very sharp and pointed question that assumed Mar Rojas was incompetent, that the president didn't trust him. How did you react to that? Is that Grace?
I was a bit shocked because there were no hints in the past that Grace Poe had that inkling about Mar Rojas. And for me, it was quite weird to ask the question that since President Aquino went to Zamboanga, it's a sign that that he didn't trust Mar Rojas and the other people there, the other leaders on the ground. So it was a surprise that she really asked that question because we never hinted that there's something about her or she didn't. We found it weird. I mean, not weird, surprising that she had that question about the relationship between Mar Rojas and President Aquino.
Earlier you mentioned that after the Supreme Court case was decided and it gave it to her, there was a renewed, they were invigorated by this. Is this part of the new Grace as we move forward to the last stretch of campaign?
You know, we reporters noticed that after the Supreme Court ruling, she became more upbeat. And we asked her, is this a sign that we will be watching out for a feistier Grace Poe? And of course, she downplayed it and said that, no, it's just all right to answer questions directly, blah, 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 like that. So we asked her directly about it and she said, no, but us reporters, we think this will be the new trend.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Camille. And watch out for her stories coming up. Now we're moving up, and I know she looks like she's still working on a story. I'm going to give the mic to Bea Cupin, who's Mar Rojas's and the Liberal Party who under her beat. Go. How did Mar do?
No, like I mentioned earlier, I think what you would notice, more than talking about expounding on his plans, you find Mar defending the Aquino administration, the mistakes of the Aquino, or the perceived mistakes of the Aquino administration. Like, for example, actually, it was Grace, I think, was most aggressive in hitting Mar and hitting the Aquino administration and directly Mar for their perceived mistakes. So, for example, you have Grace bringing up the whole BUB about it not being inclusive, about the whole issue about the menu. Anyway, we won't go into detail about that.
Yeah.
But then, like what Camille mentioned earlier, I was kind of surprised also, like how Grace framed the Mama Sapano
It
question.
was straight, right? I mean, and
Yeah. But if you recall the Senate hearings before, he was kind of sympathetic for Secretary Rojas then.
Right.
You know, about how he wasn't informed, how he wasn't looped in. It wasn't really during the Senate hearings a year ago, that angle of the president not trusting Rojas then wasn't really, it didn't pop out. You know, it was more the opposition senators. Of course, Grace was at that time was still sort of allied with the Liberal Party. Yeah, so that was just interesting. But again, and I think what they didn't mention earlier about crime, and I'm kind of surprised that Mar wasn't able to bring it up. Okay, yeah, the crime problem, but no one mentioned the fact that the PNP has a high quota. Like, they have slots for people. They just don't recruit enough
Right.
policemen. So I think that's one of the issues that the PNP has long tried to address. It's a really big problem in the PNP, like
right.
filling qualified people into those slots. So.
Can I ask you, Grace posed question in the last part of it to Mar Rojas. How would you gauge the way Mar responded?
Again, you see him, you know, I don't want to say, was he trapped into a corner? Was he trapped? Because he was kind of trapped into having to defend President Aquino again, you know. If you recall, when the probe was reopened earlier this year, Senator Enrile the goal, more or less the
Yes.
goal of the reopening was to hit President Aquino for
Correct.
the mistakes perceived or real leading up to the operation, which is of course was involving Alan Purisima, who was eventually dismissed, who was suspended at that time. The lapses, so it was kind of, it's always been his problem, and we always ask that sa coalition kay Mar. Parang paano yun? Parang how do you balance? You have this promise of continuity. Supposedly, it's proof that this brand of administration or this brand of governance is effective. But at the same time, kargado nila lahat ng baggage of the administration. So again, you see him having to defend over and over again perceived or real lapses of the Aquino administration.
Wonderful. And not just the Aquino administration, but as well
His own.
His
well,
own, right?
But it's
In
easier
the-
to defend your lapses as opposed to defending an administration's, mistakes. So that's tricky.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Bea. I know you're filing stories. Now we come to our debate adjudicators, our master debaters, and I'm going to hand you over to Patricia Evangelista, who herself is a debater.
Also a master.
They say a master debater. She debates us all the time. No.
I suspect he's being sarcastic.
I'm going to I will say goodbye. You gotta stay tuned to the stories and the rest of the things that will be coming out from Rappler. I'll turn it to Patricia.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, so I think what everyone wants to know before we go into the issues, who's your best speaker for the whole debate?
Who's first?
We won't call it a winner, but
Best
by the
speaker.
standards of what you guys usually do as adjudicators, who did best on the standards of matter, manner, and method? Glenn.
Okay. I called all rounds for Grace. I think based on what we were talking about earlier, manner, matter, method, I had her on top for all segments of that debate. Why? Matter-wise, she had the statistics down pat. We were talking about how she seemed to have memorized everything. She came prepared. The manner came across as surprising, to say the least.
What was
that
surprising?
She was more pointed in this debate than the first debate. I was talking about how I was pleasantly surprised about the sneaky trap question that she raised against Secretary Rojas in round 2, although I understand that Nix here didn't appreciate that much. Method-wise, I think she split her strategy well. Round 1, she was showing what she knew. Round 2, she was showing the weakness of the other candidates or what she wanted to know. And in the closing, she said something about what she can deliver for Cebu and for Iloilo and the rest of Visayas. So I think she played a good strategy throughout the debate. So I had her taking best speaker.
Was it a close decision? Was there anyone who could possibly have beaten her?
No, but in the different segments, I had other candidates as placing second.
Alright.
Like in the first round, earlier rounds, I had VP Binay placing second. I had Secretary Rojas placing second in the Q&A because of the quality of questions that you were talking about as well. And at the times where Mayor Duterte was inserting himself, he was effective. So it was really a toss-up on the other rounds.
Okay. Joanne?
Okay, so I gave all 2 rounds to Grace Poe as well. I don't know if the Supreme Court decision allowing her to run and declaring her eligible to run gave her a confidence boost. Because the Grace Poe that I saw today was confident and acted like a front runner. So the way she answered the questions, before maybe she had a Damocles sword hanging over her head because she didn't know if she would be allowed to run. But now, that's gone. And so the way she came out, she was aggressive. She was on point with her facts and figures. I noticed this with the first debate. She was also like that in the second debate.
But this time more on point.
More on point and more aggressive.
Okay.
We pointed out earlier the sneaky question that she posed to Mar Rojas that assumed that Mar Rojas was both incompetent and part of the Tuwid na Daan myth. And so that's why he wasn't part of Mama Sapano. So I thought she was very, very sneaky but effective, to me at least. The FOI, I thought she also inserted there that this was not a real priority of the administration, saying that the administration was engaged in doublespeak. That is aggressive behavior on the part of Grace Poe. So I thought that on manner, matter, and method, she won. And you know, earlier, Patricia, I asked for an articulation of the policies of the candidates, and barring some snide remarks and tangential points, I thought that they delivered in this debate. So I was pretty happy.
The argument often against Grace Poe is inexperience. If you look at this debate in a vacuum, could you say that person was an inexperienced possible presidential candidate comparatively?
Well, there was that one answer that I was not satisfied with, and that was with regard to Spratlys. When I think that was the point of Digong, of Duterte, when Duterte asked the question, what are you going to do if China comes and, you know, you're the president? She said she's going to wake up and, you know, face the day. So I thought that that kind of exposed a little bit, you know, that, you know, what I think Duterte was trying to show is that she's not ready to be president. But other than that, I didn't see much of the incompetence or the relative inexperience.
Yes.
Relative inexperience.
So Glenn gives it to Grace, Joanne gives it to Grace. Nicole?
Yes, it's a consensus. I'm also giving it to Grace Poe. I mean, just to add to what they said, I mean, ultimately, what is this debate for, right? This is a litmus test to how our commander-in-chief looks like. This is a litmus test to how our next president will deliver the State of the Nation address, right? We have to think big. And Grace Poe's performance, I think, convinced us that she can be a commander-in-chief. She can be equally assertive. She has a multilateralist view to the world, although Joanne said she was very unsatisfied with her Spratlys response. Yeah, she can be aggressive, but also very data-driven. So in terms of matter, manner, and method, I think this is the kind of public speaker that we can see in the national context for the next 6 years, as far as this debate is concerned. Of course, there are some low points. So we already talked about the Coco Levy issue. We talked about her, well, I personally didn't like the sneaky question to Mar Rojas. But also it's a big disappointment on how, for divorce, for example, it's a woman's issue. I was expecting, if she was ready to say yes to death penalty as long as it's about heinous crimes or drug-related crimes, then why can't you put your hand up to divorce as long as, you know, with reservations?
Yes.
So that was kind of a disappointment, not because she is a woman, but just because she has been talking about her narrative being a mother, being a woman who can carry these issues to the presidency. So there were some low points. Although, yes, in the greater scheme of things, compared to the other candidates, I think it's not a surprise that from a debater's perspective, Grace Poe took this debate.
Let's go back to that, a debater's perspective. What does that mean? Because the online community may or may not agree with you. For them, Duterte took this debate, at least from what we were seeing earlier. What is a debater's perspective versus the perspective of your average, reasonable person who is not a debater, which is the only difference?
Well, I don't want to generalize basically between a debater and an average, reasonable person, but I think we can look at it as having different standards by which we judge a debate. So obviously we were looking at what we said, the 3 M's, manner, matter, method. But there are certain candidates, like what you said, Mayor Duterte, Pat. He's basically unrankable or unjudgeable in a debate. And I say this in a positive notion, if you think about it in another manner. Because, for instance, he says, I'm not here to debate about policy. If the other candidates have a good policy, I can adopt it. I'll just make sure I implement it better. And that's not going to work in a regular debate. You can't start conceding everything and say, I'm just going to do it better.
Or choosing not to ask questions
That's
or not
really his
answer
selling
them.
point. That's his selling point. His selling point is, I have the political will, I have the support, I can get things done in 3 to 6 months, and if you give me the keys to this country, then I'm going to pull it off. That's basically unjudgeable in terms of a normal oratorical contest like what we're getting from the comments. So that's one. And number two, we see that even some of the candidates, or most of the candidates, don't want to cross him. They don't want to ask questions to Mayor Duterte. They know that he has that charisma and that support that it might not be strategic to go against him. So yes, that's a good thing that you asked that question, Pat, because we are judging this from a debater's perspective. But in the greater scheme of things, maybe everyone else will act from a different perspective.
Which the next question follows from. Is it, you said earlier, Grace Poe is the most presidential, the best public speaker, at least for the purposes of this debate, will be good for this country. is it reasonable to say that the winner or best speaker of a debate should be the next president? Is this a good standard for deciding on who your chief executive should be?
Not necessarily, although it is a good indicator, for example, of how a presidential candidate reasons, the logic, the thought process, how someone responds under pressure. So these are important considerations. But I think just to go back again to the Mayor Duterte example, right? Part of the Duterte mystique is that he doesn't talk much. He will just make these promises in 3 to 6 months. When you start unpacking that, when you start explaining that, it reduces the mystique because he is about action, he's not about talk. So if that's the kind of politics you're after, if you're after the politics of the I will, don't ask questions, I will not explain this to you, I will just do it, then maybe looking at the debate is not the best way for you to judge a candidate if you are partial to that kind of leadership. So I guess in a sense, personally, my choice is to take debate seriously because it is precisely with what they said in the debates that we can hold them accountable later on when they're in office.
Or perhaps what they choose not to say.
Yeah.
Earlier, all of you were talking about expectations when it comes to this debate, with several snide and not so snide remarks about the previous debate. Nicole called the last debate speed dating.
Yeah.
You guys were worried about a lack of clash, lack of ideology, policy, that sort of thing. John, were you happy about this debate? Was it an improvement? Was it good? What do you
Apart
think?
from the long wait, well, yes, I was happy. And the major reason why I was happy was that the questions, for the most part, from the panel were well thought of. I liked, in particular, the question about the FOI bill. I liked the question about Coco Levy. I thought the questions were timely and the issues that were raised were very, very important, at least to me. And so, when you have good questions, and I think that was our premise earlier, you allow candidates to shine or not shine, or like be dead in the water. But if you have a good question, you are promised at least a decent debate. And that's why I thought that, I know at times it became rowdy, but I liked it. I liked it. I liked the chaos because you know what? I think reasonable people can filter out the noise. And at the end of the day, I was able to get the substance of the candidates' views.
All right. We'll bring it back to our editors. Glenda Gloria will be declaring the winner, at least on the side of the editors.
So, if the adjudicators gave it to Grace Poe, to whom does the editorial board give it to?
Yes, we also give it to Grace Poe for the one-on-one. The basis of our judgment this time is how the candidate responded to the question, okay? Not how the candidate asked the question. In terms of Grace, she's very consistent in asking ASEAN for help in our maritime dispute with China. She's consistent. Even in her 20-point agenda, she already said that she will push for increased budget for Coast Guard and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And yeah, of course, on the other hand, Duterte asked for very 3 specific steps, right? And she evaded that for a while, but she brought the big picture, which of course is important. A bit of a surprise there was her mention of the Visiting Forces Agreement. She's been very consistent before this about not relying on the U.S. for help vis-a-vis our maritime dispute with China. So that's a surprise, and she did not quite elaborate on that. So, but overall, we gave it to Grace Poe. Also, in relation to the questions she asked of Mar. As far as the other candidates are concerned, in the case of Duterte, he lost the chance, right? Because Binay did not ask him any question. And in the case of Rojas, Poe asked him to explain about the worst crisis that have hit this administration. Yolanda, Zamboanga, Mama Sapano. How can you explain that in any form or in any manner? That's a tough one. And that's the catch-22 situation for an administration candidate like him.
Was there a difference in how she carried herself with this debate? Was she, some of the adjudicators were talking about how she was more aggressive, more confident. Is there a difference, or is it?
Yes, there is clearly a difference.
What was that
Well, more confidence. You know, the last debate, there was that Supreme Court decision hanging, right? Now, she's declared a qualified candidate. And you could see it in her body language, in the way she projects herself, in her tone. And, you know, she was attacking and very aggressive.
Was it an easy decision for the editors, or was it a close fight with someone else?
No, it was an easy decision.
Thank you. That was Glenda Gloria from the Rappler editorial board. We'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been with us during our coverage of the Pilipinas Presidential Debates 2016. My name is Patricia Evangelista. Thank you very much.